Hi, Rich. Thanks for taking some time to sit down with me here.
We had some controversy here with the DFL, specifically with the Minneapolis mayor.
For those who aren't aware, we went through an endorsement process, which doesn't happen every time for mayor, right? This is the first time in about 10 years that the DFL party actually endorsed a candidate.
Well, a lot of times the Minneapolis DFL will meet to endorse a candidate, but no candidate will win the endorsement. That's what has happened in the past.
Can you explain how that process works?
Absolutely. First of all, thousands of people, 6,000 people showed up at precinct caucuses in February of this year, 2025, weeks after Donald Trump got elected, because I think they needed a place to plug in to push back against Donald Trump. So from caucuses, you get elected to your local conventions, your city ward conventions, and then you get elected to the city convention as well. And at the city convention in mid-July is when they contested the mayoral race in terms of seeking the endorsement.
So how does it not end up with an endorsement? If, normally they meet for this and they do this and normally it doesn't end up with an endorsement. So how come it doesn't get an endorsement for most years?
Sure. In recent years past, candidates would go and meet for the endorsement. And then there's rules around the endorsement. You have to get it. First of all, you always have the endorsement, winner has to have 60% of the vote of the convention delegates, in order to win the endorsement. And so other conventions end without an endorsement because no candidate can get to 60%.
So this time we had a candidate, get to 60%, at least it appeared that way, Omar Fateh. And this is a progressive, DSA candidate. Obviously, progressives within the party have felt disenfranchised with what's happened with Bernie Sanders and, the Debbie Wasserman Schultz scandal going there in the primaries before. And now with Zoran Mondani, obviously, getting some pushback from party insiders and whatnot. It feels like progressives are always up kind of against obstacles. And now it felt like a really big win to progressives. And now the party has revoked that endorsement, and that's not looking very good from voters. You know, like myself, obviously I can't vote in the Minneapolis primary, but I kind of celebrated his victory with the endorsement there. And that being pulled back, doesn't look good. And I was hoping you'd kind of give us some insight on why the fuck they would do that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So first and foremost, let me say this. The volunteers who put in the time and energy to go to caucuses, get elected to the city convention, I feel terrible about this outcome because they deserve to have their voices heard. And the truth is they do have their voices heard and represented in the park board endorsements that did stand. In this particular case, there was an initial ballot taken through electronic voting means. And unfortunately, I don't even think the convention organizers realized how undercounted that ballot was. When they produced the results, they didn't realize themselves that 176 delegate votes just weren't counted, were missed. And if those votes would have counted, then candidate Duane Davis would have moved on to the second ballot. Because those votes were not counted, Duane Davis was dropped from the second ballot. Nobody in the convention hall, the convention organizers, the chairs of the convention, I don't think realized that the impact of that. And certainly the delegates in the hall weren't provided that information.
Right.
And so the convention continued and had a second ballot by show of badges. They overwhelmingly endorsed Senator Fateh. But if that second ballot would have had Dr. Davis, it would have been a printed ballot, it would have been a paper ballot, and delegates would have had a completely different option to go. And so that's why ultimately the Constitutional Bylaws and Rules Committee decided that the endorsement for mayor in Minneapolis at that convention would be nullified because the first ballot was so unaccounted by 170.
I hear what you're saying with this, and it's frustrating. Obviously, a lot of people put a lot of time and energy into this. Had that moved forward, Omar still very likely could have been the endorsed candidate. I guess I'm struggling to see where the fuck up came. Like, how was this allowed to happen? Because this, again, feels like it's adding extra obstacles to progressive candidates every time they get a step forward, and I think a lot of people are feeling that way. And how is something allowed? This happens every year. How is this a mistake allowed to happen?
Sure. Well, first of all, when mistakes happen, conventions, I think, have to have the full information in order to make an accurate decision. The mistake this time was that the convention organizers relied on a community volunteer to help build an electronic voting system that they thought would work. But when the votes were counted, the formula within the spreadsheet essentially
so software problem.
Yeah. The spreadsheet got all confused, right? The formulas got confused, and so they spent hours trying to sort through the votes to try and get into a set of results that was representative of the convention. And unfortunately,
This is a hard thing for me because obviously, election integrity, especially within the party, is important. And I understand that that's kind of why this was revoked, was in an attempt to have more integrity when a mistake was made. But it also kind of hurts the perception of integrity through elections, within the party, and makes people feel like their voice matters less when it comes to obviously getting involved. As you said, all the thousands of people who got involved and worked through this process. How can we make sure that this doesn't happen in the future going forward? What is the party going to do to not let something like this happen? Yeah.
That's a great question. So first and foremost, let me say that the DFL party endorsement must have integrity. It has a lot of value, and it comes with, I think, a lot of really positive brand for progress. So simply ignoring the mistakes that were made, I think would have tarnished the brand value of the endorsement itself. Second, I want to say that the DFL party, and moving forward, should be working with our local units when they have a large convention to make sure that the voting software and the Congress system they want to use is tested and proven. And that's actually one of the main recommendations coming out of the Constitution, Bylaws, and Rules Committee report, is that the state DFL should be involved in verifying and proving the voting means established by conventions. And I think we can do that. I think it's going to be important for us so that there's integrity moving forward, and frankly, that local volunteers who organize these conventions have the support from the state party team, staff, to do this well. And I look forward to doing it.
I really, obviously, have been working with you guys, and I want to see more integrity. I want to see people believe more in the system, and it's really hard to have kind of that belief with a lot of the things that have happened just in politics in general lately. I think the last thing that would be helpful maybe for people to kind of understand, because the system is very confusing, and a lot of times it doesn't feel transparent. How can people learn and keep their own eye on this system? Like, obviously, this is done all transparently. People can watch from front to start how this process works, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So the process itself, starts with after the convention, people can file a challenge. Those challenges, we had 102 challenges, most we've ever had in any convention, in our party's history. Yeah. Most conventions, and the utmost, challenges for 6, right?
And so, and I just want to be clear here too, you, as the chair of the DFL, did not start this process to revoke Omar Fateh's endorsement. I'm kind of gotten from when we talked behind the scenes that you sort of wished it didn't happen in the sense.
No, you always want to preserve endorsements, right? And my approach to the Minneapolis convention was, we need to preserve as many endorsements as possible because the convention delegates should be respected. As a result, we have all the park board candidates endorsed. Work with them, and the party's going to work with them to make sure that they have the support of the party. I think the Constitution, Bylaws, and Rules Committee took this very, very seriously. They had an open Zoom meeting a couple of Sundays ago, and a week ago today, where there are 252 people at one point watching the hearing, right? It's very transparent. And then, like any sensitive situation, the committee moves into what's called deliberations, and those are private deliberations to sort through all the evidence. And it took, I think, upwards of 9 hours to deliberate on exactly how we should land on this. And there's a lot of conversation internally about, the impact of that electronic vote that was valid from there. And then as we went through all the evidence, people who challenged the convention asked us to throw out the entire convention, all endorsements. And that would have really harmed the park board candidates. And so ultimately we were able to preserve all of the park board endorsements, and the first ballot from the mayor's race was just so fatally flawed that it completely changed the dynamic of this election itself. And so we had to nullify the endorsement. You never want to nullify the endorsement. And let me be very clear. Senator Fateh is running a great campaign, and he had nothing to do with this mistake. Senator Fateh is one of the victims, along with convention goers, of the mistake that was made on that first ballot, and along with other candidates who were running that day as well. So ultimately, you never want to get to a point where you're not nullifying an endorsement. This is a decision by the CVRC that I think was carefully considered, with understanding that folks are going to be very upset with it. And I understand that. And my job now is to listen to it, right? I mean, I want to make sure that progressives who love this party and want to get their candidates elected know that I'm somebody who's going to listen to them, and I'm going to lean in and there's frustration. I'm going to lean in when people are irritated and angry, and that's what I've been doing for the last several days.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions and help us understand, because it is a complicated process. And then just, so once again, to kind of finish that that first question is, where can people go to actually watch this process and learn and understand it so they can see transparently for themselves and not just kind of what they hear from,
Yeah, absolutely. They can go to DFL.org and go to the Constitution, Bylaws, and Rules Committee page, and you'll see all the information right there, right there online.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.